And I'm wondering, so these skills of kind of distilling, and I'm imagining, figuring out the stars and how to navigate your way there. How do those skills in advertising, marketing, branding, that whole world, what impact does that have on us, people in society and culture who might not be in the industry? So, I mean, what power does the advertising, marketing, and branding world have on us?
Well, there's two ways of answering that. I think it's a very good question. Other people much smarter than me have talked about this, but the idea that advertising and comms is both a reflection of the culture, but also a driver of it. I think it's very interesting when you, at a very basic level, you can get a really good understanding of what's going on in the society by looking at the advertising and the media. It's like a mirror. But the other way of answering it is essentially what we all do is creativity on demand. So that means that we have an objective and we create around that objective in a way that enables us to pull levers that get to that objective. That is the essence of what an interesting, impactful life is. I think. I know that I feel like I'm wandering into kind of Tony Robbins territory, but it's, for me, it's true. It's like those systems, especially if you want to have an impact on an environmental challenge or a social cause, those skills and capabilities are incredibly useful, whether you're trying to help a certain group of people or you're trying to work out what's going to be meaningful to you. It's a sense of purpose. This idea that you have a sense of meaning and also that you're growing as a person. I mean, for me, those are the things that make for a happy, satisfied life. And that might be partly my inability to settle. I'm very restless, as I said before, but for me, those sort of skills are really helpful at a society level, because it also means the reflect thing I was talking about, the ability to look and check. I've got this theory that assumptions are the most important thing to keep looking at, because they are, well, how do I describe it? They're like a window into the past. That's what worked in your previous life, what worked then. Looking at your assumptions and why you have them is very helpful, both at a category level when you're looking at advertising, but also very helpful when you're looking at society. And I mean, if you look at the UK or the US, we've got quite polarized political conversations. The ability to actually step away from those and look at the assumptions and say, actually, am I right? Am I sure? Am I sure I'm right? Are there places where I'm not right? That kind of conversation is really helpful for any sort of thriving society in any sense. I know that's quite a bit of a stretch, but it feels like it isn't. And that's what I think, that's advertising's gift, to be honest with you, is it's able to do those sort of things as well as represent culture. It's able to change culture in the right way if it can, I think.
That's helpful. So you've been talking a lot about individuals' purpose, finding our purpose and meaning, that make this life great. And some criticize the use of this word when it comes to companies and brands, saying that they have a purpose, so that they have a brand purpose. And others say this is, the next best thing since, the American way, since sliced bread, right? So the word purpose has been a buzzword that's been thrown a lot in the industry and among academics. What does brand purpose mean to you? If and how is it relevant? And what advice do you have about this whole big thing as purpose for non-individuals, like you and me?
Yeah. So I like my views. I like not to talk about brand purpose, because I think brand purpose is part of the problem, because when you strip it back, actually, it's about, you can't really have a brand purpose and then have a business purpose. They need to be the same thing. But if you look at what's right with purpose, I mean, the idea of having a company or an organization knowing why it exists, what value it's going to bring to the people that matter, whether it's stakeholders, its shareholders, whether it's the people who really matter, which is its audience. You know, especially when you sprinkle in environmental and ethical concerns, that's really important. And if a company doesn't know why it exists, you know, so Simon Sinek's idea is it doesn't really know, there isn't really a clue. It's the essence of a really good strategy is having a clear sense of why you exist. And where it gets interesting is when you can have a company like Patagonia, which has a clear sense of social purpose and environmental purpose right at the core of it. What happens if that isn't the case? And this is where things, I think, start to go wrong, because I call it the kind of dark side of purpose, where you go, because it's a really powerful, it nods to what we were talking about before, it's a really important cultural conversation and also existential conversation. You know, we need to start doing things differently. But because those things are important and they're really good ways of driving differentiation, relevance, effectiveness, if we get back to the advertising language, there is almost a inevitability to somebody wanting to use them as weapons to persuade people that their products are better. And the problem is, at least in my experience, you have taking these social causes and actually sometimes pushing the right buttons in the right ways, but then not having the ability for the organization itself to back it up. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not going to mention names, but you've seen them. You see them in award shows a lot, where you go, okay, that's great. That's very, very, very small part of your business. Very small. Everything else isn't like that. Or you have a bit of advertising or marketing idea that you go, what on earth did that have to do with the category? It's really confusing. And the reason I think this is dangerous is, I mean, there's an argument to say that the most important asset a company can have is trust. And when you start doing one thing here, even if it is with the best intentions, and doing something else here, that is not a good way of building trust, especially in a social media world where people can find it out and tell everybody about it. So for me, the question, and again, my UN experience really changed my point of view on this, because I've been involved in lots of really interesting projects that were very specific in specific places, but they weren't about the whole organization. So the question is, what do you do? And for me, it's actually quite a simple thing, which is, I use the term conviction, because I've got this idea that your purpose is only as good as your conviction to it. So just call it conviction. And I realize that's tricky, because everybody uses purpose, so it's not necessarily the smartest way of approaching it. But if that's your convictions, you've got, well, actually, what are the depth of your convictions? So there needs to be functionally deep, so that's across the whole organization. It needs to be emotionally deep, so it needs to really make you think about, okay, what do I get out of bed in the morning for that? Does it matter to me? Really important? Is it really important? Then you've also got, it needs to be breadth, so across the whole organization, wherever it is found. But also, I kind of added two more things, and this came from the kind of business and innovation strategy. It needs to create ideas. It means, you know, as soon as you think of this, whatever you call it, purpose, conviction, whatever the idea is, it needs to be generative. So you have all these ideas that come out of it, and then it also needs to be able to evolve over time. And so that's a kind of basic framework that I use. But then also, if you're Patagonia, I think that's pretty much, that kind of ticks. If you're Patagonia, it ticks all the boxes. The problem is, if you're an organization, like most organizations, that don't have that kind of moral compass at the center of them for social, environmental causes, how do you address that? And for me, I realize that there's another bit. So you've got all those depth, breadth, ability to evolve, and then creative ideas. But there's also the how is more important for them, which is, and I call it principles of action. So if that's what you're going to do, how are you going to do it? And if you can't do what you need to do without going against the principles, now these principles don't need to be ethical or environmental, but they probably do now. If you can't make what you want to make without going against that, that's means you're not going to have integrity between those things. So for me, that's how I advise companies about it. And it's actually quite similar to humans, which is don't try and force fit a ethical environmental purpose onto your core purpose, your core conviction, if you can't do it. And it seems so obvious, but most companies don't seem to do that very well. And I think it can backfire dramatically. And you end up with kind of damaging trust. So that's, for me, that the problem is you get a lot of people talking about purpose, and I don't think they really think about what it actually means in a broader strategy sense for the whole organization. So as soon as you start talking about brand purpose, I think it gets confusing, because it sounds like it's a light thing. In fact, it's not. It's a business fundamental thing. It's a sustainable business thing.
Yeah. It's not surface. So you gotta, like you're talking about roots before, right? You need some roots for that.
That's exactly right. And I'm aware that it's an area that is full of good, and corporations have the power, especially the really big ones, have the power to make enormous impacts on the world, both attitudinally but also functionally. Mm-hmm. I just think the fundamental shape of what people understand as purpose, I think, needs to be rethought. And that's as much an advertising problem as it is a core business problem. If that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah, I could talk about this for hours, because it comes up every time Cannes comes around. It kind of I realise that there's some problems with what we think of purpose.
You could write a whole book for us about that.
Probably. Hopefully somebody would want to read it.
I would read it.